Well, what's going on, everyone? James Hancock here, back with a review of Episode 5 of Season 3 of True Detective, If You Have Ghosts. HBO pulled a fast one and posted this episode online a few days ago without my noticing, presumably because the Super Bowl will put a major dent in their viewers this evening, so this review is officially a few days late, but I wanted to do a quick rant just so my coverage of this season will be complete. This episode was written and directed by series creator Nick Pizzolatto, and I think he's proven over the last two episodes that if he wanted to direct every episode from now on, he is more than capable of doing so. Daniel Sackheim is in the director's chair for the last 3 episodes this season, and in addition to directing the 3rd episode of this season, he's also directed episodes of Jack Ryan, Better Call Saul, The Leftovers, and more. But in that Nick Pizzolatto is the series creator and writes the majority of the episodes, I just like the idea of the creator being the sole voice on the show because there's so few shows that are written and directed by a single individual. But there wasn't really any big news this week related to the show, but I did stumble across a really compelling theory being discussed on Reddit that ties into the plot of this episode. Far more observant viewers than I have been paying very close attention, and they offered this hypothesis, namely that the kidnapping of Julie was the work of Attorney General Gerald Kent and the head of Hoyt Foods, whose own granddaughter also went missing. Julie was essentially going to be a gift to console Hoyt's grief-stricken daughter, and many suspect that it might have been Hoyt's daughter in the fancy car with the black man who was mistakenly assumed to be Sam Whitehead. Once again, this is pure speculation, but I think these people might be onto something. But let's dig into some of the details of this episode and see what new revelations were offered. But what I appreciated most of all in episode 5 was the introduction of the character Roland in the 2015 storyline. No matter how intricate the plot might be, and no matter how badly we might want to learn the truth, the heart and soul of this season is the relationship between Purple Haze and Roland West, which until now has made the 1980 and 1990 subplots far more interesting to me. But just to keep things simple, I'm going to break down the 3 different stories this episode by the years in which they take place. So, starting with 1980, we see the immediate aftermath of the raid on the trash man, aka Brett Woodard's home. The dumbass who kicked in the door gets completely, totally liquefied, and what follows is easily the biggest action set piece this season. The situation rapidly disintegrates into complete fucking chaos and pandemonium with this 3-way crossfire between everybody involved. Anyone dumb enough to leave their head exposed rapidly gets their brains blown up by Brett, and the mine that he set on his property does a fair amount of damage as well. Roland ends up taking a bullet in the leg from one of the idiots who started this mess, and I don't know why, but there's something about the way Stephen Dorff screamed, "Oh, fuck!" that absolutely made me crack up. In any event, Brett has no interest in being taken in by Hayes and forces him to shoot him down. But what's interesting is what happens in the aftermath of all this chaos and bloodshed. We see Hayes and Amelia in a pretty interesting sexual encounter with Hayes peeling off his blood-drenched clothes. But as we come to learn later in the episode in 1990, Julie's kidnappers used the chaos of this situation to make their move. And a cop by the name of Harris James, he finds Will's backpack totally unharmed in the crawl space of Brett's property, as well as a burnt article of clothing that belonged to Julie. And this was all that was needed to place the kidnapping and the murder firmly on the shoulders of Brett in 1980. But we also learned that Harris James mysteriously disappeared in 1990, and I suspect that Roland and Hayes killed him, which is one of the many deeds they refer to at the conclusion of the episode. Once again, though, that is my theory. I can't prove it. The main drama in 1990 this episode is this press conference where Julie's dad implores her to reach out to him and let him know if she's okay. Not only does this press conference open up a can of worms about whether or not Brett was guilty, but it leads to this mysterious call to the state police hotline, and the girl on the call is very vague about who she might be referring to, but she keeps saying that Julie Purcell is not her real name and that she wants her dad to leave her alone. Now, is that evidence that she started using the name Hoyt after being kidnapped? I don't know. But even more unnerving is how she's still looking for her brother at that time, who she thought was simply resting when she left him. And lastly, she says, "He took me, and I'm never coming back." Now, Julie's never found in 1990, but Hayes and Roland look under every stone they can and talk to as many people as possible, including poor Freddie, who is still absolutely traumatized from his encounter with Hayes in 1980. And as they drive away, Hayes seems to feel a little conflicted about Freddie's fragile emotional state until he remembers that at Freddie's age in 1980, Hayes was fighting for his life in Vietnam, and so he concludes that Freddie's whole generation, in his words, is a bunch of pussies. And there was something about the way that Ali just leaned into his delivery of that line with such intensity intensity and such condescension, he absolutely made me crack up. But they also learned from a homeless person that in his dealings with Julie, she was always talking about looking for her brother, and as she thought she was secretly a princess from the pink rooms, whatever the hell that means. But the final development in 1990 is the fact that all the unknown prints that were taken in 1980 have all mysteriously vanished from the file by the time 1990 rolls around. Clearly somebody's cleaning up after themselves, and I suspect it is Attorney General Kent. But my favorite part of this episode has to be the reunion between Hayes and Roland in 2015. Hayes figures out that the note from the kidnapper back in 1980 was most likely written by Julie's mother, and he asks his son to drive him out to where Roland lives. And they haven't seen each other in almost 25 years, but Roland breaks the ice with this great line. He says, "You're looking good, Purple. Who's that old man with you?" Hayes takes Roland aside and explains to Roland that his dad is missing giant chunks of his memory and likely won't remember whatever their argument was from 24 years ago. And then in a very sweet moment, Roland says, well, maybe he doesn't remember either. But as Hayes and Roland get to talking, Hayes tells Roland that Hoyt came to see him the day after what happened. He knew what they had done, and once again, I suspect that Lucy's cousin, as well as Harris James, were both murdered by Hayes and Roland due to their involvement with Julie's disappearance. But I must emphasize, that's what I suspect. I can't prove. At any rate, at age 70, Roland is not remotely interested in having a detective adventure with Hayes, but what Roland really wants to know is why Hayes has never stopped by for a beer, never stopped by to say he was sorry in nearly 25 years. Roland has no wife, no kids, and no old friends to reminisce with. And as they both started crying, it nearly broke my heart, especially when Hayes admits he honestly can't remember his life. But if Roland says that Hayes owes him an apology, then he is truly sorry. The scene was just absolutely brilliant. And honestly, these quiet scenes between these two dudes talking, these are going to be my favorite memories from this show this season. But in spite of Roland's genuine desire not to stick one toe back into the case, Hayes really wants to find Julie and put this case to bed before his disease leaves him as nothing more than a drooling squash plant, as he says. Finally, reluctantly, Roland agrees to help. So I think that's all I have for now. Next week's episode is co-written by Graham Cord, who created the show Quarry, a show I've never seen, but it'll be interesting to see what he brings to the table. We only have 3 episodes left, so I imagine the show will likely start wrapping up a lot of these loose ends. But my biggest takeaway from the season so far is that Nick Pizzolatto no longer needs to have his hand held by other filmmakers to bring his vision to the screen. I hope he continues to work with other writers, but I'd love to see him take on the challenge of directing all of season 4 himself. And if he really wanted to make me happy, he'd include a crossover between seasons 1 and 3 in season 4. But whatever he does next, I hope he takes a good long break after season 3, because as we saw with season 2, when he tries to return to the well too quickly, the final result can be disastrous. But I'm absolutely having a blast with this show. Can't wait to see how things wrap up in a few weeks' time. I can't believe this show is almost over. I feel like it just got started. But if you enjoyed this reaction and review, please consider subscribing to my channel and giving this video a like. That's very helpful to me, and I would really appreciate it. If you want to talk more about this show, or basically anything under the sun, you can find me on Twitter at Colbrax, and there's a link in the description below. So thanks again for watching my video. I really appreciate it. Hope everyone had a good time watching the Super Bowl, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.